feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And that pinging noise we just heard means that this call is also being recorded. So just be a word of warning there. If you come off on camera or you ask a question verbally, your voice or image will go onto the recording. So just bear that in mind as we go through today. I'm also joined by Fiona from the Google team.
Thank you so much, Andy. So I'm Fiona Law. I've been a teacher for a very long time, and now I have joined the Google for Education team working in partnerships, programs and communities. Thank you so much for joining us at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. We wanted to put on this webinar at a couple of different times, and we really appreciate you giving up this half an hour to 45 minutes of your time to join us to hear all about Gemini, your AI assistant from Google. And I'm sure you will hear lots of tips and tricks and demos that I hope will be very useful to you.
Great, so let's get up and running. And Fiona almost said the first line of these slides. So Gemini is Google's AI assistant. So it's within the Google suite of tools. There is the tool called Gemini that lives there on the web and is now available inside Glow. So this is probably a good point for also to introduce Susan onto the call, just to talk through the best way of accessing Gemini if you want to go through Glow to be able to get to Gemini. So Susan, do you want to share what I thought was the fastest route I've seen yesterday?
Yep, absolutely. I'm just hopefully going to share my screen in a second. Andrew, could you let me know if you see my screen okay?
That's all good, Susan.
Yeah, we've got your screen nice and clear now.
Brilliant. So once you're logged into Glow, top right-hand side, View My Files, drop-down menu, Google Drive. This means you don't need to add any tiles from the app library. It'll just take you straight into Google Drive. App Launcher at the top right-hand side, Gemini on the second row from the top. Easy peasy. Any questions? All good?
All good, thanks, Susan.
All good, perfect.
And feel free, anyone who's got any questions as we go through today's webinar, to pop questions into the chat. And someone mentioned there, I think it was somebody from Highlands, where they don't use Glow. Gemini is also on the web at gemini.google.com. So if you've got access to Google in different ways, you might come a different route. But obviously the bulk of people watching tonight are coming in through Glow. So we'll follow Susan's route in to get to Gemini. And that's probably the fastest route in. So I'm going to jump up next and just share my screen back in. And this time I'm going to share in my Gemini window so we can have a look at Gemini and see how Gemini works and how it responds when we are using it. So in comes Gemini. So here I am on the home page of Gemini, and as we can see at the bottom, we've got this sort of prompt box at the bottom, which is where we're able to put information in and ask Gemini questions for responses we want to get back from Gemini. So in this case, I'm going to use voice typing just to speed things up. I'm going to just ask Gemini for some, in this case, lesson ideas. So I'm going to pop in and go, please give me some lesson ideas. Oh, I need to. Please give me some lesson ideas. I'm going to type the rest of my words in for a geography lesson, because I can't just say lesson ideas for a geography lesson. Let's just put that prompt in for now. And as you can see, Gemini then goes away and thinks about some ideas. In this case, it's helping me come up with some ideas for my geography lesson. But I'll be honest, that's probably one of the worst prompts I've ever written into Gemini. And we're going to spend a little bit of time in a moment talking about how we improved our prompt writing to get something more specific than the very general response I'm getting right now from Gemini in response to that. But we put a prompt in, Gemini gives us a response at that point. So we've got some response here from Gemini. As you can see, it's quite a lengthy response because it wasn't very specific. And down here at the bottom, I've got some options. I can write the response good or bad. I can regenerate it if I wanted to have another go. And I've also got a share button, which I can press, which then allows me to export that out to something else. In this case, I can go out to Google Docs if I want to take the text there from Gemini across to another Google tool, in the case of Google Docs. So I'm just going to flip back to my slides and talk a little bit about writing better prompts and improving prompt writing. So When we're using Gemini, we're using that space at the bottom to put in a prompt. And a prompt is just an instruction for Gemini to be able to create some text, create some content. And we'll talk about different sorts of content a bit later on. And I often think it's a bit like when we as teachers are asking questions of our students. And these two examples on screen here are examples of when teachers have asked questions of students, but maybe they've allowed various different ways of students to respond. So in the case all on the left, they've asked for a small clock at 11:10, and it's clear that students got the question right. In both of these examples, the students have got the answers right. But in both these cases, the prompt wasn't specific enough, and it allowed these sort of loopholes for students to be able to answer in this way. When we're talking to Gemini, it's a bit like us as teachers asking questions of students. We have to give detailed prompts. We get the right response back. And at Google, we've done some work to identify what a high quality prompt looks like. And we often use these 4 areas. So as you're writing a prompt into Gemini, think about these 4 areas. So the first one is persona. Who are we? And what role do we want Gemini to perform? So you're often going to be a teacher, so you need to tell Gemini that you are a teacher, and that's the role you want it to assume. The task is clearly identifying what you want it to, what you want help with, what do you want Gemini to do, what do you want it to produce. And if it's complex, you can break that down into smaller parts. The context is the background information. What else does Gemini need to know? So earlier on when I was doing my prompt, I didn't really give it much background information. And so Gemini produced lots of different ideas because it didn't know who I was teaching or what class or where I taught in the world. So give it the context. And then the format. How do you want it actually to come back to you? What do you want it to produce? If you don't specify a format, Gemini will often produce very long responses. And so if you want short responses, particularly if you're creating content for students, you might want to ask it to produce short responses that are 2 sentences long, or use simple language, or use an appropriate reading age for the material it's producing. So have a think about that as you're writing your prompt. But if we look at what I did earlier, when I just said suggest lessons for, I think I didn't even say on rivers, I think I just said suggest ideas for a geography lesson. We can break that down and make a better prompt. So if I wrote, I'm an experienced geography teacher working in Scotland, that gives it a persona. If I then say, suggest ideas for a National 5 geography lesson on rivers and valleys, I can give it a more accurate, focus it in on V-shaped valleys, waterfalls and meanders, really give it context, and then make each point no more than 2 sentences. So by giving it a much more detailed prompt, it's a lot more likely to give me the sort of response that I want back out again. And we find this quite a lot with people using Gemini for the first time, that they don't really give long enough prompts. And as a result of that, the response is quite short. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a prompting guide that Google have created. It's a much more detailed guide about writing prompts. But if you want to dig into more detail, there's a link there in the chat space on the right-hand side in Google Meet for you to be able to get a lot more information about writing prompts. But try and think through those 4 areas as you are writing prompts into Gemini. So if I come back to Gemini now, and what I'm then able to do, I'm going to start a new chat. So on the left-hand side here in Gemini, I'm going to start a new conversation, a new chat. And with my new chat now, I'm going to put that much longer prompt in that I just created, where I'm giving it a lot more detail. It's got all those elements in. And then what will happen is, because my prompt was better, then obviously what I'm getting now in terms of response back from Gemini is far more accurate, it's far more useful, far closer to what I may have wanted. There's a couple of new features that we'll draw upon coming out in Gemini, and some of these only launched last week, and one of them has actually popped up right now. You can see it says at the bottom here, have Gemini write a document or code that you can edit. It's recognized that I'm sort of working on a bit of a document here because I'm asking it for some ideas. If I press that, it will sort of take my prompt again and sort of put it into this sort of document over on the right hand side here, and we call this space canvas inside Gemini. So we're just sort of saying to it, oh, please just create this as a sort of as a document piece rather than just be text in the middle. One of the advantages of working in Canvas is I get the sort of export to docs button over here, so I get that, and obviously I can play around if I want to with my text, and I can sort of use headings and tidy it up a bit if I want to style it a little bit more. So I'm sort of saying, please do that. I can also ask prompts of my output. So here I can ask little bits. I can ask it actually questions about some of the things it's already suggested. Canvas is new in Gemini, only came in last, I think, Thursday. Fiona will correct me if I'm wrong, right at the end of last week. So it's a new area within Gemini. Anyone who's used it before might not have seen that before. So that's simply asking the prompt of Gemini at this point and getting it to create some content. Just coming back into my slides for a minute. Let's flow on through. I can also ask Gemini to deal with images. Gemini is something that we call multimodal. In fact, it was the first multimodal AI tool that was available. And multimodal means, as well as working with text, where I'm asking it a question, it's responding with text, I can also use images inside Gemini. I can both give it images of content, and I can ask it to generate images back again. So if I go over to Gemini here, left-hand side menu, start a new chat again. And the reason I'm starting a new chat is that I want to start new topics. I don't want it to get confused with my old conversation. And this time around, I'm going to give it an image. So I'm going to add an image into Gemini, and I'm going to add an image, in this case, of some handwriting. So a student's done a piece of work, and I'm just adding the image of that handwriting in. And I'm going to ask it to firstly just read the text from the image. So when I do that, Gemini is just reading the text that's in that image, what our student's written. So it's able to identify that there's some words within that image, and it's able to do that. I'll fix the prompting guide link in a second for you. So it's able to read that text, and then after that, I can then ask it to use that text to create a new image. So I can say, use the description above to create a new image. And then what I'm doing is I'm using in this case, what that student's written. And I'm a little bit nervous now because it was quite a scary piece about a dark wolf. So I'm a bit worried how much scary this image might be. But it's using that. It's using a tool in Gemini called Imagen 3 to create, in this case, it's created a moonlit tree in a forest, and there's my scary wolf at the front. So I'm using both putting images in, and I'm also using Gemini to create images coming out the other way. And that's what we mean when we talk about multimodal, this ability to use content in lots of different ways. Let's give it one more example of an image. So I'm just going to go back to images again. And this time around, I'm going to give it a piece of music. So imagine I'm a music teacher and I've got a random piece of music. And I might say, what song is this from? So I'm asking it to, in this case, read the music from the image and look at the lyrics. And in this case, identify where this piece of music has come from. And again, it's able to evidence where that music's come from by looking at the way of looking at information it's been trained on and get that in. So these are all examples of using Gemini with images to create content. Fiona.
I just wanted to share that I used that for my own daughter's homework when she came home with a maths question that I couldn't help her with because the way to do that part of algebra had slipped my mind. And so I just took a photograph of the question and asked it for an explanation. And I didn't ask it for the answer. I just asked for an explanation of how you do that question. And it works really well. So many different uses of uploading an image to ask for help, not to cheat, but just to ask for help and guidance. It does that brilliantly. Thanks, Andy.
No worries. So we've seen the image use in Gemini. The next one is being able to export to different things. So we've already seen a few times in my demos already, exporting something to Google Docs. And we've seen that button floating around. It's in the share button at all times. But sometimes we might want to work with Google Sheets instead. So I'm going to come back into Gemini. And this time I've got my new chat again. I'm going to ask it to create I'll ask for a task list for a school charity event. And I'm asking it to draw this as a table. So when you ask for something to be displayed as a table, it's got confused. It's not found my prompt very well today. I'm going to rewrite my prompt as a table. Let's try this. I think the word table might have confused it. So I'm going to do it the second time around. No, it still doesn't like it. Create a task list of responsibility. So my prompt is too short. It's not enjoying it today. For a school charity event as a table. I'm still not happy. I'm going to change my prompt to something else. I'm going to ask it to create an example teacher mark book as a table. Let's see if it'll do something different instead. Okay, it's still created it in a very strange way today. So let's go and see if it will turn that into a proper table. Where I can export it to Google Sheets. Now it's still created it in a funny way. It's got a mark book still, but I've got export to docs, not sheets. So it's a bit hit and miss sometimes as to whether the mark book will export to sheets. If you get a table right, it does seem to be a bit fussier since we introduced Canvas. But if you get a table right, you'll see the button export to sheets. Even though this has come out in Google Docs format, I could still just highlight it, copy and paste that across into Sheets. If I drop that into Sheets, it would still drop in a perfect way. So if you want to move stuff around between Sheets and Docs, you can do. You can use the copy button up there. You could use the highlight or just the copy button here to take content across between those two areas. Okay, so outputting to Docs and Sheets at various points, you can bring your content out of Gemini in different ways. Then we have something new that's launched it's been around for a while, but it's now available to everybody that's using Gemini. And that's something called a gem. Because earlier on, I was saying, well, what you need to do is write a detailed prompt. You need to write detail in your prompt to be able to get a good response back. But actually, that can be a bit frustrating if you're doing the same thing over and over again. So a gem really is a way of saving time by telling Gemini some information and just speeding up the process. So I'm going to show you an example of a gem inside Gemini. I'm going to come off this example. Let's go to a new chat again. And this time around, I'm going to go on the left-hand side menu down to gems. Let me just share the right tab. I'm going to go on the left-hand side menu. I'm going to go down to gems. As you can see, I've got some gems down here. I've got Gem Manager, I've got some gems. And I've got one here called IEP. And this IEP is about writing education plans to support certain students. So I'll just get started. I'll say hello, and it'll start asking me a series of questions. So it'll say, I'm here to write some IEP. What are the individual needs of a student? So I'm going to say, maybe I'm supporting a student who's dyslexic. So I'm going to put dyslexia in. And then it says, is there any additional information you want to add? So obviously I could put some things that I know about the student, but for now I'm going to speed this up and just put none for now. And then what this is doing is it's giving me some suggestions for what I might be able to do to support a student with dyslexia. So as you can see, I've written very few words into this Gemini prompt because I'm running a gem. So let's go and have a look at the gem that sits behind that. By going over to the three dots and pressing edit, I can show you the gem that sits behind that. So in the gem that sits behind that, I've given Gemini a lot of information about what IEPs are, what sort of things should be included in them. And so I've given them loads of information there. And at the bottom, I've said, here's what I want you to do. Ask me to describe the needs of the student. Ask me if I want to upload anything else, supporting information, generate the IEP as a table. So what it's able to do there is give me these ideas for different students with different needs. Every time I run this gem, it's just giving me different ideas for students. And you'll notice I'm being nice and data secure here because I'm not giving it information about individual students. I'm just asking it to support me with the needs of different students. So it's being nice and generic. I'm not putting their personal information in, but I'm getting ideas back to help me because maybe students have got needs that I don't know how to support within my class or within my lesson. So that's using gems, which is another new feature inside Gemini. And again, you can play around with gems. Fiona.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can I pause just to answer a question in the chat? So Jim has asked if you can prompt it to create a table directly into Google Sheets. So although you can't prompt directly to create into Google Sheets. I'll just show you, if you create a prompt, if I go over to my Gemini here, and I've just asked Gemini to create a risk assessment for an educational visit to Edinburgh Castle in a table. So I've asked it for the table. You'll see there it's given me the hazards and the control measures and so on. And then at the bottom, you get this button, Export to Sheets. And when you click on Export to Sheets, it will generate a new sheet for you. And then if I click that, it's put it straight into a Google Sheet for me. So a couple of clicks to get the table into a Google Sheet. Okay.
Thanks, Fiona. You managed to get the Export to Sheets button to play. So when you ask for a table, it should show you in that way. So that was great to see. So back in we go. I'm just going to share my screen back in now. Let me bring this back in. So we've talked about exporting content, and we were just finishing off on gems there. Let me move on. So then there is another new feature. There's lots of new features coming into Gemini right now, but another new feature that came in last week, that is called Deep Research. And Deep Research is a much more detailed mode on Gemini that allows you to send Gemini away to find out more about a particular topic. Because of the time it takes, I'm not going to do a Deep Research live while we're on this webinar, but Deep Research can take up to 30 minutes to go away and do its research. Because of the time it takes, you're limited to a maximum of 5 Deep Research tasks within a 30-day window. So there is a limitation on Deep Research. You put in the prompt and give it obviously a lot of detail about what you want it to find out about. It will go away, it will research across the web and produce you a written report of its information. That's really useful if you're looking for supported educational research, particularly around education-informed teaching. So if you're thinking what research is there to support the teaching I'm delivering, you can have Gemini go away and support that with some deep research. Again, came out, I want to say last week, is one of the latest releases into Gemini and available for everybody across who's using Gemini. So if you want to think about a topic, send Gemini away. You don't have to sit and watch it while it's researching. You can leave it running in the background and you can do deep research in that way. So that's deep research inside Gemini. Okay, and Canvas is the other new feature. We've seen Canvas already. I saw it earlier. We created a Canvas. That's the new Docs feature inside Gemini. So we're able to create new spaces for people to work. Canvas works well when you're creating documents. It also works well for any CS teachers on the call, computer science teachers, when you're asking Gemini to do coding, because it can put that code in a separate window and keep it nice and clean. So it's also a useful place if you're doing coding inside Gemini. So Canvas is another new feature that dropped out. So this is a good moment for me to mention that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And we're going to go on now just to mention a couple of other Google tools that exist that are in our space but are separate, and we thought would be useful to mention within the call. But if you've got any burning Gemini questions, now go and pop them in the chat, and we'll come to those at the very end of the webinar. So there are a couple of other Google tools out there, and the first one we want to mention is a tool called Notebook LM, and we want to mention it because I know Susan is doing some research at this at the moment. So this is not currently available inside Glow, but Susan is doing some research around the availability of this, so she might ask you about that at the end. But for now, what I would say is Notebook LM is a different Google tool, so it's not Gemini, it's something separate, and it is able to use AI to focus in on one area. So you can probably see from the screen there, Notebook LM is a personalized AI tool where you pre-train it on your own sources and your own documents. So one of the issues with using a big wide AI tool like Gemini is it's got the whole web and you have to use a prompt to narrow it down. But imagine a version of that where maybe you just upload 1 or 2 resources and then the AI tool is able to answer questions based on those resources. And that's what Notebook LM is. So Notebook LM is a far more focused tool, and people have been using it with subject content, with their own resources in that space. So I think Susan is putting a form in the chat to find out people who are interested in using Notebook LM inside Glow. So if you are interested in that as a tool, not currently available in Globe, but something that we'd like to work with Scotland getting turned on, then feel free to pop that in. Notebook LM, it's got a variety of different uses, whether that's just focused use, whether that's around a subject or a topic, or as a school leader, things like school policies are popular in Notebook, being able to read school policies back. And then on the right-hand side, you can probably see, just about as the conversation, Notebook LM can produce podcasts. So it can take the information that you've uploaded into it and produce a podcast of people explaining your document and your source. So that's Notebook LM. Out from Google, and obviously we're doing some survey work to find out who's interested in that. Thank you, Susan, for sharing that. And then the other thing just to explain after this is the different versions of Gemini that are available. Everything I've shown this evening is available inside Glow in the Gemini app at gemini.google.com. And you can see that on my screen here, on that left-hand side in the Gemini Photos, which is a free of charge tool. And Notebook LM is also free of charge. Just to make you aware, because sometimes people will go out and see other people using this, there is also a paid version of Gemini for Workspace that sort of brings those AI tools inside Google Doc Sheets and Slides. So you see the star button inside Doc Sheets and Slides. I wanted to just flag this because sometimes people get confused between the different versions that exist out there, and they're not sure. They see other people and they're like, why can't I do that inside, let's say, Google Docs? And that's because they're possibly that person is using Gemini for Workspace, and what we're using is the Gemini app. So I really just wanted to mention this to flag the differences between the two. Everything we can do inside Gemini, we can still export out, and we've seen lots of export buttons today. But the actual buttons inside the tools, that comes only with the paid edition that is Gemini for Workspace. So just to flag that there are these different versions out there to you that are made available. So that's hopefully whetted your appetite to go away and play on Gemini this evening. But now it's sort of time. I'm going to stop my screen sharing, but we're going to sort of do some Q&A with everybody to see what questions people have got to ask or answer. So I'll stop my screen share. I might bring it back in to answer questions. And then Fiona will go over to the chat and see if we've got any questions in the chat for different areas. So I can see lots of comments about the updates. Fiona, have we got any questions coming in?
There aren't any at the moment. Just while we wait for people to perhaps type in their questions, just a big thank you to the team at Education Scotland who led the pilot with Argyll and Bute and Clackmannanshire before Christmas. A very, very rigorous, thorough pilot involving lots of educators in different roles who came up with amazing prompts and use cases for Gemini, as well as things like creating lesson plans or lesson resources. There was also people using it for summarizing policies. They were using Gemini for planning difficult conversations with colleagues. They were using Gemini for such imaginative and inventive purposes. So I'd highly recommend reading the report from that from the pilot that took place before Christmas. Thank you so much, Susan, for dropping that in. Andy, I would just like to, because there was so much information shared there. It's kind of Google's fault because they did about 3 updates in the last week just to keep poor Andy on his toes. Andy, if we share in fact, I can share this in, just to show folks where all those different tools are when you go into Gemini. So when you're in Gemini, obviously there's the prompt box at the bottom where you can type in, or you can voice type in if you click on the microphone. But then also Andy mentioned the different models, including deep research. So if you want to use the deep research function, you go to this drop down arrow in the top left. And instead of using Flash, oh, my deep research isn't showing. It's not playing. It's normally
it's
there.
Moved to the bottom, Fiona. In the recent updates, it's gone down the bottom there.
It's gone like today, maybe. I'm sure it was there yesterday. So deep research has gone into the prompt box at the bottom. Canvas that Andy mentioned, the new feature, it's also in the bottom of the prompt box, kind of in grey writing. And every time you want to create a new conversation and kind of wipe the slate clean and start again, press the big plus key to start a new conversation with Gemini. And gems, which is those, how would you describe the difference, Andy, of when you're using a gem and when you're just using a Gemini chat? When do you go down to use gems?
I would use gems if it's something I'm going to be doing a lot of. So think about your job role, think about what you might do a lot. And if you're going to be asking it the same thing over and over again with slight variations, build a gem.
Thank you so much. Great. Let's go back to the chat and see if there are any questions. Aha. So there's a question about Google Vids. No plans to bring that into fundamentals at the moment. Jim is in the paid version of Google Workspace, but it's an exciting tool, and you're right, absolutely right to keep asking. And then best way to move information from the chats to save. The chats are saved for 72 hours. So that would be creating a gem if it's something that you want to ask and you want it saved in your Gemini homepage, then you would create a gem to save it.
Or bring your content out into a doc is another way.
Yes.
And it's just that usefulness of just thinking about, is it something I'm going to need to use again and again? And that's the choice around that. So I think we've answered those questions. Anything else? There's the main ones. Well, me and Fiona will hang around if people have got individual things they want to ask. We'll do that off camera. We'll do that off recording, so don't feel you need to be recorded if you've got individual questions you'd like to ask myself or Fiona. But we'll hang around and stay and answer more questions. And then thank you. Other than that, thank you all for joining us this evening. Good luck in your use of Gemini. We're really interested in people sharing use cases back with us as well. So if you have a particular piece of a really good example of something, maybe you discover a really amazing way of working with Gemini, feel free to share it back with Susan and Fiona and myself, because we are building up these really good use cases across Scotland and across the rest of the world of places that are using it. So yeah, go off and have a play and come back and let us know how you get on. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording now if anybody wants to stay in to ask any questions.